YouTube? This is your boy Network Prodigy, and I'm back with another Cisco tutorial. And what I'm going to be covering for you guys in this tutorial is the use case for the IP helper address command. Now, we need to use this command anytime we have clients who are connecting to the network and they're trying to get an IP address via DHCP, but the DHCP server is not on the same network as them. So looking at our topology here inside of Cisco Packet Tracer, we have two VLANs. We have VLAN 10 and we have VLAN 20. In VLAN 10, we have a PC and we have our DHCP server, who I've given him a static IP of 192.168.10.0. And then for VLAN 20, I have this PC that's over here all by himself. Now, these PCs, we're going to configure them to become DHCP clients. But what you're going to notice is that this PC that's in VLAN 10, that's in the same subnet as the server, he's going to be able to get an IP address via DHCP. But this PC over here that's in VLAN 20, that's not in the same network as the server, is not going to be able to get an IP address via DHCP. So let's first click on the DHCP server, and if you ever want to test this out in Packet Tracer, all you do is click on the server, go to config, come down to DHCP, make sure the services is turned on, and then down here is where you can add your different scopes. Okay, so all you would do is just click here. You see I gave it a name of VLAN 10 for the pool name. This is the IP address of the gateway, so that's the IP address that's configured on this port right here on router 1. And then I gave it the IP of the DNS server, which I just used a random IP, and this IP happens to be the IP address of Google's DNS server. And then the IP address that I'm going to start with is 192.168.10.30, and this is the mask that I'm going to use. So once you have all this information, all you got to do is click add, and it'll add it down here. Okay, and this is the one that I'm using for VLAN 20. Same thing, all I did was change the third octet from 20 or from 10 to 20. And I need to change that. So once you make a change, all you have to do is click save. Okay, so here's VLAN 10, and here's VLAN 20. Okay, so let's test this out. Let's come over to this PC right here that's in the same VLAN as the server. Let's double click on him. Let's go to IP configuration. Right now he's configured for static, meaning I will have to manually input this information myself. But let's click right here on DHCP. So it's requested an IP address, and DHCP was successful. So we got the IP of 192.168.10.30, got a 24-bit mask, and it got the IP address of its gateway, 192.168.10.1. Okay, so if I come over to my command prompt, I do an IP config. Here's my IP right here. I have my mask, and I have the IP of my gateway, which I should be able to ping the IP of my gateway if everything is good. And we see we're getting replies, so that's great. Okay, what I'm now going to do is come over to this PC right here that's in VLAN 20. I'm going to come over to desktop, click on IP configuration, and I'm going to do the same thing. Instead of doing static, we're going to do DHCP. Now you see it's requested an IP address, but as you're going to see in a minute, DHCP is going to fail. Okay, so we are unable to get an IP address via DHCP. Okay, the reason why is because when these clients first come on and they're trying to get an IP from DHCP, the first message that they're going to send is a DHCP discover message. This is when the clients are trying to see if a DHCP server already exists on the network or not. But these broadcasts, or these DHCP messages that the clients are sending, they're sent as broadcast. And we know that VLANs are their own broadcast domains. So since the server is in an entirely different VLAN or on an entirely different network than this PC, he's not going to hear the broadcast, or he's not going to get the discover message that this client is sending. And that's why DHCP is failing, right? So we come back, we click back over. It's requesting an IP, and DHCP is going to fail. Okay, again, that's because the PC and the server are not on the same network. They're not in the same broadcast domain. So the discover message that he is sending is never going to make it to the server, and he's not going to be able to get an IP. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over to our router over here. That's the gateway for VLAN 20. He has a static IP of 192.168.20.1 on this fast Ethernet interface right here. And we're going to tell the router who the IP address is, or what the IP address is for the DHCP server. So when the router ends up getting that broadcast, he's going to know to forward it over to the server. Okay, because right now the broadcast is going to the router, but the router isn't doing anything with it. So we're going to come over to our router. We're going to go into enable mode, go into global configuration mode. We're going to go under the interface, and we're going to say IP helper address. And now we have to give it the IP address of the DHCP server, which is 192.168.10.20. Okay, so if we do a show run, we come down to our interface right here, FA0/1, we have the IP address of our DHCP server. So now when the router receives those discover messages coming in, he's going to know to forward this over to this IP address right here, which is the IP address of our DHCP server. And of course, you do have to have routing in place, so the router has to know how to actually route traffic to this IP. Okay, and if everything is good, we should now be able to come to our PC over here for VLAN 20. We should be able to get an IP address in this subnet right here, and we then should be able to ping our gateway. Let's come over to our PC. Let's go to IP configuration. Let's click back on static. So it said DHCP request failed. Let's click back on DHCP. It's requesting an IP, and now it's successful. And you see he got an IP address in VLAN 20, which is the 192.168.20 subnet. So he got 192.168.20.31. He got a 24-bit mask, and that's the IP of his gateway. So we come over here, let's do an IP config. We see we get the IP, we get the mask, we get the IP of our gateway. Let's just see if we can ping the gateway, which we can. And since we have an IP, we know who our gateway is, we should be able to ping the other PC that's in VLAN 10. Oops, forgot to put ping. And there we go. Okay, so the IP address helper command, really simple command, but it's going to be needed anytime you have clients connecting to the network. They're trying to get an IP address through DHCP, but the server is in another network or another VLAN. So it's not on the same network as the clients. That's when you're going to need the IP address helper or the IP helper address command configured on the router.